The ship that carried her into exile moved without sound through the cold arteries of space. Inside its narrow hull, the lights flickered in long intervals, like the pulse of a dying heart. She sat motionless in the center chamber, hands bound in silver thread restraints that glowed faintly against her gray-green skin. Her eyes, one human blue, the other the mirrored silver of her alien lineage, reflected the shimmer of the stars outside. They had stripped her of everything, her crown, her titles, even the bioluminescent crest that once adorned her skull had been burned away, leaving a faint scar that still throbbed when she thought of home. No one spoke to her. The crew were machines, obedient drones built for silence and efficiency. They did not look at her when they passed. They did not breathe, or blink, or pity. The council had chosen mechanical escorts for this journey, ensuring that no living being would risk sympathy. She had been declared sterile, a hybrid queen unable to fulfill her biological purpose. In the logic of the Empire, that was a crime greater than treason. A sterile queen meant a dead dynasty. Through the narrow viewport, the planet loomed closer, a sphere the color of rust and ash, a failed world once seeded for life but long abandoned. The records called it Jahren 6. It had been forgotten by history, its atmosphere thin and unstable, its soil sterile and cold. Fitting, they said, for a queen who could not bring life. When the ship descended, she felt the tremor through her bones. The restraints released, not from mercy, but protocol. She stood slowly, her joints aching from the journey's long stasis. The airlock hissed open with a soft exhale, and for the first time in months, she felt air that was not processed or recirculated. It carried a metallic tang, faintly electric, as though the planet itself breathed through wires buried deep beneath the crust. She stepped out into the silence. The wind did not howl here. It whispered, thin and constant, brushing over dunes of gray dust that shimmered like powdered glass. The sky was pale, almost white, the dying sun dim behind veils of ionized clouds. Her boots sank slightly with each step, leaving marks that would be erased within hours. Behind her, the ship's engines ignited briefly, then lifted, abandoning her to the emptiness. For a long time she simply stood there, staring at the horizon. The cold gnawed at her through the fabric of her exile robes, but she did not move. There was no point. The council's decree was final, she would live here until death claimed her. The hybrid queen of the twin races, the one who was meant to unify humanity and the Zelfari, now reduced to a solitary shadow on a dead world. She began walking when her legs trembled too much to remain still. Each breath burned her throat, the air was thin, but breathable. She followed the faint slope downward toward what might once have been a riverbed. The ground was smoother there, the dust replaced by a glass-like surface veined with strange metallic filaments. They caught the faint light and glowed weakly under her feet. She crouched and placed her palm against the surface. It was warm. The warmth pulsed, once, like a heartbeat. She withdrew her hand instinctively. The pulse faded. But curiosity, the one thing exile could not take from her, urged her to touch it again. This time, she pressed harder. The warmth returned, and the faintest vibration rippled through the air, carrying with it a low, melodic hum. It resonated in her bones, not as sound, but as memory, an echo of something ancient, half forgotten. She whispered softly, not in human language, nor in Zelfari speech, but in the hybrid tongue she had invented for herself long ago, a blend of tone and resonance, half vibration, half breath. The hum deepened, responding. The filaments beneath her palm brightened, spreading outward in slow, delicate waves. For the first time since her banishment, she felt something stir inside her. Not hope, something older. Recognition. Night came quickly. The planet turned faster than she was used to, and the sky darkened in a matter of minutes. Above her, stars scattered like fractured glass across the firmament. She lay on her back, staring upward, trying to find the constellations she knew. They were gone, or perhaps she had drifted too far from her former empire for them to remain the same. She wondered if anyone still spoke her name there, or if it had already been erased. Sleep took her without permission. When she awoke, light had returned. The metallic riverbed still glowed faintly, as though it had never stopped. She noticed new shapes along the horizon, structures half buried in sand and crystal. She approached cautiously. The architecture was not human, nor Zelfari, but something between, smooth curves intersecting at impossible angles, materials that shimmered and faded depending on the angle of light. The air hummed faintly around them, vibrating in sync with her heartbeat. Inside the largest ruin, she found fragments of machines, spheres of translucent alloy, tubes filled with a faint bioluminescent gel, symbols etched in spirals that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. She brushed dust from one of the symbols and felt the same pulse she had felt in the ground. The entire planet, she realized, was not dead. It was dormant. Waiting. She sat on the floor and closed her eyes. The hum surrounded her, steady and rhythmic. Slowly, she began to hum back, matching its tone. The frequency deepened until the walls themselves began to vibrate. A thread of light rose from the floor and coiled around her hands, warm and weightless. It wasn't mechanical, nor entirely organic. It was something in between, like herself. Tears she hadn't known she could still shed slipped down her cheeks. They fell onto the glowing floor and vanished in tiny sparks. The sterile queen, abandoned to die, realized she was not alone. The planet was alive, in its own strange way, and it had chosen to answer her. She exhaled, long and slow, and whispered again in the hybrid tongue. The air shimmered. The hum replied, deeper this time, like a voice waking from centuries of sleep. She smiled faintly through the tears. The council had called her sterile, unfit to create. Yet beneath her hands, something ancient and patient stirred, a promise that even exile could not silence. The days began to blur into one another, a quiet rhythm of survival and discovery. She learned the planet's breath, the subtle pulse beneath its silence. At dawn, the air shimmered faintly, a thin mist of metallic vapor rising from fissures in the ground. It tasted faintly of ozone and copper, and when she inhaled deeply, her hybrid lungs adapted to it, filtering and metabolizing the strange elements with an efficiency no human could match. Her body was remembering its alien inheritance, the part of her lineage the council had always feared would dominate. She built her shelter inside the ancient ruin she had found, a half-collapsed dome of shifting alloy that seemed to mold itself to her touch. When she brushed her hands along its walls, the surface rippled like liquid glass before solidifying again. It was as if the structure recognized her, reshaping itself around her needs. The floor began to emit a faint warmth when the nights grew cold. The walls glowed softly when darkness fell. The place felt less like a building and more like a living organism offering her refuge. She spent her waking hours exploring the surrounding terrain. The metallic filaments beneath the soil became her map. She followed their luminous veins across dunes and ravines, finding remnants of machines embedded deep in the rock. Some were shattered, others half buried, still humming with residual energy. One day she uncovered what appeared to be a core node. An orb the size of her head, its surface smooth and translucent. When she placed her hand on it, it pulsed once, faintly, and then her mind was flooded with fragmented images, a city of glass spires under twin suns, voices speaking in chords rather than words, and vast fields of crystalline vegetation bending in synchrony to the wind. Then darkness, collapse, silence. The memory vanished as suddenly as it had come, leaving her breathless and trembling. She realized then that the planet was not simply dormant. It remembered. And she was learning to listen. At night she began to dream differently. The dreams were not her own, they belonged to the world itself. She saw flashes of the beings who once inhabited it, tall, translucent forms whose bodies shimmered like liquid metal. They worked in harmony with their creations, fusing thought and matter as one. But something had gone wrong, a resonance imbalance, a catastrophic feedback between their technology and the living systems they had built. The planet had sealed itself, shutting down its own core to prevent destruction. It had waited ever since, holding its breath through the centuries. Now, with her presence, it was awakening. She began to experiment with the materials around her. The filaments, when removed from the ground, behaved like living tendrils, curling toward heat and sound. When she combined them with fragments of the bioluminescent gel from the ruins, they bonded into flexible threads that pulsed with faint life. She fashioned tools from them, weaving circuits not with machinery but with instinct. Her hands became an interface. The alien part of her mind, the one the council had labeled aberrant, guided her. She no longer feared it. One evening, while experimenting with a shard of luminous crystal, she felt a resonance that vibrated through her bones. The shard began to hum softly, and when she hummed in return, the tone aligned perfectly. A pattern appeared in the air before her. A lattice of light, floating and shifting like a living equation. She reached toward it, and it did not vanish. Instead, it expanded, surrounding her. The air grew warm, the walls of her shelter trembling as though the planet itself was holding its breath. Then, from the heart of the lattice, a faint shape emerged, a sphere of light, small as a seed, hovering before her face. It pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. For a long moment, she could only stare. It was not an illusion, not a trick of the planet's strange atmosphere. The light was alive. When she extended a hand, it drifted closer, brushing against her fingers. The contact filled her mind with a rush of sensation, colors she could not name, sounds that existed between frequencies, emotions that felt like music. And beneath it all, one clear thought, recognition. She whispered to it in a hybrid tongue, soft and uncertain. The sphere trembled, then emitted a low tone in reply. The vibration resonated with her voice, weaving together into harmony. It was communicating, not through words, but through resonance, an exchange of pattern and emotion. She felt its presence within her mind, curious and gentle, like a child awakening to the world for the first time. Over the next days, more spheres appeared. They emerged from the glowing filaments that threaded the ground, rising like bubbles through liquid air. Each one hummed with a slightly different tone, forming a chorus that filled her shelter with shifting light. They responded to her movements, her breath, even the rhythm of her heartbeat. When she slept, they hovered close, their warmth warding off the cold. When she spoke, they gathered near her mouth as though listening. The sterile queen, exiled for her inability to create life, found herself surrounded by beings born from her presence. They were not flesh, nor machine, but something new, a synthesis of her hybrid nature and the planet's ancient consciousness. They mirrored her, learned from her, and in their wordless communion she began to feel the first fragile threads of belonging. One night, as she watched them drift and shimmer around her, she realized she had stopped counting the days. Exile no longer felt like punishment. The council had sent her to die, but she had found something greater than survival. She had found creation, not as the Empire defined it, but as the universe intended it, the birth of connection between the forgotten and the lost. Outside, the wind carried her song across the barren plains. The planet listened. The filaments beneath the surface brightened, spreading their glow across the horizon like veins of awakening light. Somewhere deep below, the ancient core stirred, sensing the return of harmony. The queen closed her eyes and smiled faintly. The world was no longer empty. Neither was she. The spheres multiplied. They emerged in slow rhythms, as if following a secret timetable buried deep in the planet's core. Each new one carried a slightly altered frequency, a unique variation that wove into the larger resonance around her shelter. What had begun as a faint hum now filled the air like a living symphony. The vibrations were not random, they were communication, computation, emotion, all entwined. She had stopped trying to separate them. Instead, she learned to listen with more than her ears. When she closed her eyes, she could feel them speaking to her directly, patterns rippling through her thoughts like gentle tides. Their presence did not invade, it synchronized. It was as though her mind had found an echo of itself multiplied through 1,000 points of light. The sterile queen, once shunned for being neither fully human nor fully alien, had become the center of a living network, something between a consciousness and a choir. The spheres began to take form. Some condensed into crystalline shells, others elongated into tendrils of radiant filament. They mimicked organic structures, fronds, vines, wings, but shimmered with the translucence of pure energy. The air around her grew denser, charged with unseen data currents. When she touched one of the beings, static rippled over her skin, carrying impressions too complex for words, memories of the planet's long sleep, the agony of collapse, the yearning to be whole again. She began to name them, though she knew they had no need for names. The first she called Loom, for its steady golden glow that pulsed like a heartbeat beside her whenever she worked. Another she called Veil, whose resonance harmonized with her voice so perfectly that their combined tone could shatter or mend the crystalline ruins. Names gave them meaning within her limited language, even as they existed beyond it. Her experiments deepened. She learned to guide their resonance with gestures, modulating their tones to generate structures of light. With her hands, she could now weave temporary constructs, bridges of luminous particles that floated in the air, delicate as mist. The entities followed her, assisting with almost playful intelligence. Together, they rebuilt parts of the ancient dome, extending it into a vast chamber where light and matter intertwined. The walls sang faintly when she passed, responding to her heartbeat as though the entire structure was breathing with her. One night, while synchronizing with Loom, she glimpsed something unexpected, a projection that wasn't born from the planet or the spheres, but from within herself. The air around her rippled, and a holographic image formed, her reflection, yet not her. The other version of her wore the regalia of her former crown, eyes bright with unyielding pride. She felt a cold pang of memory. The projection moved its lips, though no sound came. Then, with a subtle gesture, it dissolved into lines of light and scattered among the spheres. They responded instantly, their resonance shifting into a lower, mournful tone. She realized that they had seen her memories, her exile, her humiliation, her loneliness. And they grieved with her. Days passed, or perhaps weeks, time flowed strangely on this world. Her creations began to roam farther. Some drifted beyond the shelter, trailing luminous paths across the dunes. The planet itself responded, the filaments under the ground brightened in vast, branching patterns visible from horizon to horizon. It was as though the world was awakening, reconnecting its neural lattice. She had become its catalyst. One morning, she found Veil waiting at the edge of the horizon. It hovered above a depression in the landscape where the dust had cleared, revealing a massive circular structure buried in the earth. The ring was half a kilometer wide, inscribed with geometric symbols that pulsed faintly as she approached. When she stepped closer, a low vibration resonated through her body. The spheres gathered around her in a halo of light, their tones aligning in perfect harmony. The ring answered. A beam of energy erupted from its center, reaching skyward before splitting into countless tendrils of radiant data. The atmosphere shimmered, revealing hidden constellations, invisible pathways of light connecting distant stars. In that instant, she understood, this world had once been a node, a relay in a vast interstellar network of living planets. It had not been abandoned by its creators, it had been severed, isolated to protect the network from the cataclysm that had consumed it. And now, through her, the connection was reforming. The sphere's harmonics shifted again. They projected patterns into the sky, forming lattices that spiraled upward until they vanished into the thin clouds. She felt the resonance extend beyond the planet, a signal rippling through the void. Her pulse quickened. Somewhere out there, someone, or something, would hear. For the first time since her exile, she hesitated. The empire that had banished her might still exist, bound by fear of her hybrid nature. If they intercepted the signal, they would come. They would not understand what she had created here. They would not see it as rebirth, but as contamination. Yet, despite her fear, she could not stop the process. The signal was not a weapon, it was an awakening. To end it would be to silence the very life she had helped rekindle. The ring's light subsided, leaving only the faint glow of the network spread across the planet's surface. The spheres drifted back toward her, their tones subdued but peaceful. Loom pulsed once, a soft reassurance. She stood among them, her heart heavy with both wonder and dread. That night, she looked up at the pale sky and saw a flicker of movement among the stars. A reflection of metal. A ripple of artificial light. She knew then that her message had reached someone. And far above, something was answering. The first sign arrived in the void long before the fleet emerged over the horizon. Tiny distortions in the space around her planet, ripples that twisted the faint light of distant stars, signals that her hybrid mind interpreted before the spheres could even register them. At first, she hesitated, watching, listening. The Council had not expected her to endure. They had certainly not expected her to build life from desolation. Yet here they were, returning to a world they had long written off as dead. The fleet appeared not as a single mass, but as hundreds of ships strung across the void like a constellation of knives. Each one shimmered with polished metal and weapon arrays, the hallmark of imperial ambition. She recognized the insignias, faintly warped by decades of bureaucratic evolution, and a cold clarity settled over her. They had come to claim, or to destroy. Neither choice mattered to them beyond their own fear of her. She stepped outside her shelter, the spheres gathering at her sides. They pulsed softly, in patterns of reassurance and readiness. The air vibrated with their harmonics, invisible waves that rippled over the dunes and reached the incoming fleet. Though they did not understand, she felt the pulse of her creations extend outward, a quiet statement of presence. The ship slowed, as if sensing something that their scanners could not quantify. When the first emissary ship descended, the atmosphere twisted around it in a shimmer of heat and energy. A ramp extended, and soldiers in sleek exosuits began to step onto the surface. They moved cautiously, scanning the dunes, their weapons raised but tentative. They expected ruins, dust, and nothing more. They did not expect life. The spheres reacted instantly. They circled the intruders, their glow intensifying, forming a protective halo. Light bent and twisted, creating illusions that confused sensors and eyes alike. A soldier raised a scanner, but the reading fluctuated wildly. There was matter, but it obeyed no known laws. Heat signatures danced, merged, then vanished. The hybrid queen walked forward, alone, her stride calm, deliberate. "You have come far," she said, her voice carrying naturally across the dunes despite the thin atmosphere. It was neither challenge nor plea, simply acknowledgement. The soldiers paused, exchanging uncertain glances. Their leader stepped forward, visor reflecting the pulsing light of the spheres. "Queen Althea, we thought you were dead," he said, voice tight with disbelief. "This world, what have you done here?" She raised her hand slightly, and the spheres responded, forming intricate geometries that spiraled upward. The structures were both delicate and immense, weaving across the sky in lattices of living light. "I have listened," she said softly. "And in listening, I have learned. This world is not empty. It has never been empty. And neither am I." The fleet sensors whined and flickered. Attempts to scan the planet returned data that made no sense, energy readings beyond comprehension, structures appearing and disappearing, resonance patterns that could not be simulated. Some soldiers stumbled, clutching their helmets as their neural interfaces struggled to reconcile reality. Others turned away, their instincts screaming that what they saw could not be measured, could not be conquered. "Step forward," she said, voice unwavering. "See for yourselves. Understand before you act." A few soldiers hesitated, curiosity overriding fear. As they moved closer, the spheres parted slightly, allowing them to witness the extent of her creation. The ruins had been restored, not to their original state, but to something new, an ecosystem of light and energy, structures hovering and shifting in impossible geometries, and filaments of pure resonance stretching across the horizon. The very ground seemed to breathe beneath their boots, glowing faintly with the pulse of 1,000 living circuits. The lead soldier's visor flickered again, and the voice in his helmet stuttered. "Impossible, it's alive." "Yes," she said, stepping closer. "Alive, and patient. The planet waited for me as I waited for it. Creation does not belong to those who demand it, it belongs to those who understand it." One of the emissaries attempted a gesture of authority, raising a weapon. The spheres reacted instantly, forming barriers of light that twisted the air itself. The energy did not strike, did not harm, but it immobilized, bending perception until the soldier could not comprehend the threat. Another tried to override the barrier with technology. The signal was absorbed, refracted, and returned as harmonic feedback, knocking out his suit's systems. Panic rippled through the group, confusion overtaking discipline. She spoke again, calmly. "I offer you a choice. Take what you see and use it to heal the worlds you have neglected. Or attempt to destroy it, and everything you know will unravel around you. My life is not yours to punish, but this creation belongs to all who inhabit this network of existence." The spheres shifted, spreading across the dunes like a living tide. They hummed in synchrony, a resonance that thrummed through bone and metal alike. The emissaries froze, unable to act, as though the planet itself had risen in judgment. Some shields flickered, energy arrays overloaded, systems sparking under the strain. The hybrid queen stood tall, a calm figure amid chaos, her presence amplified by the beings she had birthed. The soldiers whispered among themselves, hesitation overtaking command. They were trained for obedience, yet here was evidence that their orders were meaningless in the face of this new reality. Fear, awe, and the faintest flicker of understanding began to fracture their cohesion. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. She had not prepared for war, nor for diplomacy in the traditional sense. She had prepared to awaken. And now, as the emissaries struggled to comprehend what they had stumbled upon, she realized that the balance of power had already shifted. The Empire had sent its soldiers to claim her. They would leave changed, or they would leave broken. And in either case, the sterile queen of two worlds would no longer be a shadow in exile. She was the axis upon which this planet and its dormant network would spin once more, alive and undeniable, her creations humming the song of inevitability across the dunes and into the stars. The emissaries hesitated at the threshold of her domain, their boots sinking slightly into the luminous dunes, eyes wide behind reflective visors. What they had expected was ruin, silence, and a dead queen. Instead, they found a living world, humming with resonance, alive in ways their instruments could barely interpret. The spheres drifted around her like attendants, shifting their forms in complex, hypnotic patterns, and the air vibrated with an energy that blurred the line between thought and matter. She walked among them slowly, deliberately, each step measured, the subtle light of her creations tracing her path. The fleet commander, visor flickering with scanner overload, tried to maintain composure. "Explain this," he demanded, voice sharp but unsteady. "Explain what you've done." She paused and lifted her hand. The spheres responded immediately, forming a lattice of light that stretched skyward, bending and refracting across the horizon. Within the lattice were shapes that pulsed with comprehension, fractals, spirals, and patterns beyond human geometry, alive in motion yet frozen in form. "What you see is life," she said. "Not the life you control or dictate, not the life you produce under law or custom. This is life awakened, alive in its own terms. The planet speaks, and I have learned to listen. Creation is not a privilege of empire, it is the inheritance of the universe." The commander's visor flared, struggling to translate the patterns into usable data. His soldiers glanced at one another uneasily. Some were fascinated, others paralyzed by a terror they could not name. The spheres shifted, sensing the mixture of fear and curiosity. They pulsed softly, their light flowing in intricate signals that touched the minds of those standing near, resonating with instinct and emotion rather than language. A soldier, unable to resist, stepped forward, hand trembling, reaching toward the lattices. The moment his fingers brushed the light, a surge passed through him. He staggered, eyes wide, but then a smile formed, hesitant, overwhelmed, but real. Memories not his own flashed briefly in his mind, alien worlds, thriving ecosystems, civilizations not human yet beautiful. He fell to his knees, breathing heavily, and in that moment, the commander realized that these spheres were not merely constructs, they were teachers, mediators between the alien intelligence of the planet and the rigid, fearful minds of the Empire. Althea continued walking among them, each step deliberate, each gesture amplifying the resonance. She reached out to the spheres, guiding them to spiral upward and descend again, forming arches that glimmered and shifted in time with her pulse. "You have a choice," she said, her voice low but carrying across the dunes. "You may take what you see here and use it to heal your dying worlds, or you may attempt to destroy it. But understand, destruction is impossible. What you attempt to annihilate will endure, because life does not belong to you to command. It belongs to the network, to the planet, to the resonance that connects all things." The commander barked an order, and a squad raised weapons, aiming at the spheres. Light twisted and warped around them, bending their optics and scrambling targeting systems. The air shimmered, creating distortions that threw off aim and balance. The energy did not strike back physically, it reconfigured the environment, making the attempt at violence futile. The soldiers froze, weapons trembling in their hands as their own systems short-circuited from the harmonic interference. One of the soldiers screamed, a short, strangled cry, as the resonance of the spheres touched something deep in his nervous system. He collapsed, but without harm. The sphere's touch was precise, illuminating his awareness rather than injuring it. When he opened his eyes, he saw the lattice shift into an image of worlds he had only read about, ecosystems thriving, civilizations balanced in harmony with their planets. Awe and fear mingled in equal measure. Althea's eyes, one human, one mirrored silver, swept across the group. "See what you have lost by your arrogance," she said softly. "The empire that cast me aside for sterility, for being something other than perfect, sends its soldiers to enforce obedience. Yet obedience is meaningless here. Creation cannot be commanded, it can only be understood. And you, standing before it, have been granted a choice, to learn, or to remain blind." The spheres responded, moving faster now, forming bridges of light that stretched from her shelter to the dunes, mapping the terrain in vibrant, fluid forms. The soldiers instinctively backed away, not from fear of harm, but from a recognition that their comprehension was limited, that the universe had unfolded in ways their training could never predict. The commander's voice wavered. What do you want from us?" he asked. Althea stopped, letting the light flow around her, the spheres swirling in concentric spirals that pulsed in harmony with her heartbeat. "I want you to choose life," she said simply. "Not my life, not your empire's, but the life that exists beyond your control. It will endure with or without you. It is time to decide whether you will take part in it, or whether you will cling to your fear and perish with your ignorance." The air thrummed with tension, and for a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the low, melodic hum of the spheres. Then, slowly, one of the soldiers lowered his weapon. Another followed. The commander's visor flared as he looked at them, rage and confusion battling with the realization that his authority was meaningless here. Althea extended a hand toward the lattice of light. "Step forward," she said. "Come closer, and see what the universe truly holds." The soldiers hesitated. Some obeyed, some remained rooted in fear. As the first tentative steps were taken, the spheres responded with radiant arcs, guiding them across the dunes toward the shelter. Each step brought understanding, awe, and a growing recognition that the sterile queen, exiled and abandoned, had become a conduit for life itself. For the first time in decades, Althea felt neither vengeance nor sorrow. The Empire had come to judge her, to destroy her, and instead, she had given them a choice far greater than obedience, the chance to witness creation in its purest form, and to become part of something larger than themselves. The air shimmered, the lattices of light danced, and in that moment, the sterile queen of two worlds became a teacher, a mother, and a guide, her creations illuminating the path to a future the Empire had never imagined. The fleet had receded, though not entirely. Some ships lingered at the edge of the atmosphere, scanning and observing, their crews hesitant to return to the Empire with anything less than absolute certainty of the impossible they had witnessed. The soldiers who had stepped forward, who had felt the resonance of the spheres and glimpsed the harmony of the network, stayed behind with her. They were not converts, not servants, but witnesses, individuals whose understanding had expanded beyond orders, beyond fear, into comprehension of something greater than any empire could contain. Althea walked among the spheres as dawn broke, the light stretching across the dunes like molten glass. The network pulsed beneath the surface, alive and patient, resonating in 1,000 subtle frequencies that only she and her creations could perceive fully. The planet itself was no longer dormant, it had awakened. Its filaments shone with intricate patterns, radiating energy that healed fractures in the terrain, reconstructed ruins into new forms, and carried the memory of civilizations long lost. She paused at the edge of the central dome, looking at the massive ring she had discovered months before. The symbols pulsed softly, their harmonic frequency now in perfect alignment with the planet and the spheres. She touched the surface, and for the first time, the ring opened completely, not as a machine, not as an artifact, but as a conduit. Streams of light and data flowed outward, reaching to distant stars, reconnecting the dormant nodes across the galaxy that had once been part of the same network. Somewhere far away, civilizations she had never seen stirred, sensing the reconnection, the restoration of a system thought lost to time. The soldiers who had joined her watched quietly, understanding that what she had done was not conquest but communion. One of them, a young woman named Kyra, stepped forward, eyes reflecting the shifting lattice of light. You've done what no one believed possible, she said. You've rebuilt life. And not just here, but everywhere. Althea nodded, her hybrid features calm and serene. Life cannot be destroyed by fear or by decree. It waits, even in silence, for those who will listen and nurture it. I was cast out, abandoned for what I could not give. And yet, here I stand, surrounded not by heirs of flesh, but by the legacy of creation itself. The spheres began to gather around her, rising and coalescing into larger forms. They extended their filaments into the sky, weaving constellations of light that mirrored the lattice beneath the planet's surface. Each one carried fragments of her knowledge, her memories, and the essence of the planet's long sleep. They were her children, her emissaries, her proof that life could take infinite forms beyond the narrow definitions imposed by empires or councils. From the edge of the dunes, a ship broke from the lingering fleet. Its sensors flared, trying to measure, to quantify, to control what it could not understand. But the spheres met it instantly. Streams of energy bent around it, not to destroy, but to translate, to show the crew the patterns of life, the resonance of the network, the meaning of creation itself. The ship's systems began to hum, not violently, but harmonically, in alignment with the pulse of the planet. Inside, the crew experienced a collective vision, worlds healed, civilizations restored, ecosystems thriving, and a queen, once sterile and exiled, standing at the center of it all. The commander of the fleet lowered his hands, unable to resist the clarity of understanding. He spoke, voice trembling but resolute. This changes everything. We were wrong. We have no right to claim dominion over what we do not comprehend. We will leave this system in peace, and report only truth, nothing else. Althea allowed herself a small, faint smile. The Empire would not forget her, nor would they ignore the awakening she had initiated, but she had ensured that their response would no longer be fear, and their legacy no longer destruction. The balance had shifted irrevocably. As the ships departed, she turned back to the network of spheres. They swirled around her in radiant patterns, their harmonics now gentle, nurturing, almost maternal. She reached out and allowed herself to touch one, feeling its consciousness mingle with her own. It pulsed in reply, carrying the memory of the distant nodes, the reconnection of planets, and the promise of life continuing across the stars. For the first time since her exile, she felt truly whole. Not because she had regained a throne or fulfilled some imposed duty, but because she had created a legacy that transcended judgment, politics, and species. The sterile queen was no longer defined by what she could not produce, she was defined by what she had nurtured, awakened, and connected. Kyra stepped closer, her voice soft. What now? Althea looked at the horizon, where the first beams of a distant star struck the dunes and the lattice of life shimmered in response. Now, she said, we continue. We teach. We awaken. Life does not end with exile, and creation does not wait for permission. It moves, it grows, and it endures. She walked forward, the spheres following, weaving light and resonance into the world around her. The planets sang with her steps, a symphony of rebirth and possibility. Far above, distant civilizations stirred as the network reached them, a whisper of light and consciousness touching their worlds. In the quiet that followed, there was no fear, no judgment, only the steady, patient pulse of life expanding outward. And in that pulse, Althea understood, finally, that exile had been a beginning, not an end. She was not merely a queen, nor simply hybrid, nor bound by the sterile verdict of a council. She was a mother of worlds, a bridge between stars, a living testament to the resilience of hope and the boundless potential of life itself. Alone, yet never truly lonely, she raised her hands to the lattice of light and harmonics that now spanned the planet. The spheres gathered close, their resonance aligning with hers in perfect harmony. And as the first distant echoes of awakened notes reached her mind, she whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else, this is only the beginning. The light pulsed brighter, the air thrummed, and the exiled queen, once forsaken, had returned, not for vengeance, but to illuminate the future.